Get you a man that can do both, okay? Because long have I been called a Gojo fanboy, a coper, delusional, biased, and yet here today, I have someone accusing me of being a Sukuna glazer. So all I gotta say is, who else is doing it, okay? Play both sides so you always come out on top. But shout out to Jacob today who says, listen, no disrespect or hate, I love the content, but you glaze Sukuna too much when it comes to the domain. And Jacob goes on to list a few things that basically make it sound that Sukuna's domain isn't all I've cracked it up to be. So let's address each of these things. All right, so the first couple of things Jacob points to downplay Sukuna is when Mahoraga and Yuji just walk through his slashes like they're basically nothing, right? So let's address each of these. And first of all, with Mahoraga, this is in no way speaking to the strength of Sukuna's slashes because Mahoraga has adapted to them. That is why he's able to walk through this in this moment, not because they're weak, right? And while this was kind of stretched out in the anime, this happened in the manga as well. Sukuna opens his domain, Mahoraga gets absolutely littered with slashes, but they don't do anything to him because he's already adapted. Now, in Yuji's case, he obviously can't adapt to anything, and this is one of my favorite panels in the entire manga. It's incredibly cold. But this too can't really be used to downplay Sukuna because these were nowhere near his full strength. And in fact, that was the entire point of this part in the manga. It was showing how much Megami was restricting him. So Yuji is still him, but no one else could really do this under these circumstances if Sukuna was actually using his true power. Next, Jacob says he doesn't think it's that hard to survive Malevolent Shrine as long as you have RCT. And I think that is a gross oversimplification of what we saw here because yes, Gojo was able to survive with RCT, but I don't think anyone else in the verse could do this. This was a testament to just how powerful and how skilled Gojo was. Now, it is true that we see the rest of the cast survive one of Sukuna's domains later, but importantly, all of them were using anti-domain techniques. When Gojo was healing through Shrine, he did not have a simple domain. He was just sitting there taking it and healing through it. No one else could do that, as we see here, because Yuji is trying to use simple domain, but it ultimately collapses. He can't maintain it throughout the full duration of Shrine. And when it collapses, he has to endure slashes, but thankfully they only last for a few seconds and he ends up losing just a foot. Yuji, who is probably one of the best RCT users in the verse behind people like Gojo, Sukuna, Yuta, Hikari obviously, was not able to heal through this. And remember, he has an easier path to RCT thanks to blood manipulation, and he only had to endure it for a couple of seconds. And then finally Jacob says, and all you have to do to shut down Malevolent Shrine is just beat Sukuna enough to where he can't hold his domain any longer. And he didn't even hold it for 5 minutes when we saw this happening. And again, I think this is a gross simplification of what we saw because Gojo did that, and no one else in the verse is even coming close to that. No one else would even have that as a potential, right? Yes, we saw Sukuna's domain against Yuji that I just referenced end early, but that was only because of how weak he was, and he had to make a binding vow to only have the domain open for 90 seconds in order to not sacrifice any output. Under normal circumstances, no one else is doing this, right? Because one, you're going to have to be using simple domain or else you're just going to die. Two, you're going to have to be healing constantly if you're not in a simple domain. So where does that leave you any room to even try to engage Sukuna in hand-to-hand? Not to mention the fact that he's going to be coming at you while you're dealing with his domain all the while, right? No one besides Gojo is capable of handling like any piece of that. So the downplay is crazy in my opinion, but if that makes me a Sukuna glazer, then that is a mantle I will wear with pride. Just don't forget to include Gojo in that, because my stance has always been that these two are equal and they are leagues and leagues above everyone else in the verse. So that's always where I'm coming from when we're talking about stuff like this. And actually, on this subject, I got another Gojo and Sukuna question here from AKM, which says, no curse technique, true form Sukuna versus heavenly restricted Gojo. And the video where we talked about heavenly restricted Gojo is where Jacob's original comment came from, and obviously this one from AKM, because I said heavenly restricted Gojo would have absolutely no shot against Sukuna. So AKM wants to know, okay, well, what if we remove Sukuna's curse technique? And still, I think Gojo's getting washed, because a heavenly restriction just cannot compete with the level that Gojo and Sukuna are on. And one thing people brought up in my original heavenly restricted video, good lord, was perhaps Gojo's heavenly restriction would be worth a lot more if he sacrificed something as powerful as the Six Eyes and the Limitless. And if we want to say that, then maybe, okay? But as far as I'm concerned, the heavenly restriction, while there can be variances in their skill level based on training and, dedication and all of that stuff, I don't think there's different levels. Like, I think if you have 0 cursed energy, you have Toji and Maki's heavenly restriction. I don't really think it matters what they gave up to get there, right? Because if so, I don't think Maki and Toji would have been stated as equals as they were, right? So, theoretically, if you could make a binding vow giving up something as powerful as the Six Eyes and the Limitless, would you get a greater boon compared to what we saw from Maki and Toji? Sure, I understand the logic there, but I still don't think a heavenly restricted Gojo would necessarily be leagues above Maki and Toji as we saw it. Anyway, I'm getting long-winded here. The point is, even if we strip away Sukuna's curse technique from him, I still think he's washing heavenly restricted Gojo, because that's just the different level that they're on. And then finally, I got one more Gojo Sukuna question here from Jojo, which was, what if Sukuna had used the fire arrow on Gojo? And this is something we've talked about in previous videos, so I'm not going to get into the why he didn't use it, but the short version is the way he was altering his domain made it impossible for him to use his binding vow, combining the fire arrow and the domain. So it's not that he chose not to use the fire arrow against Gojo, it's that he couldn't, right? So in a world where he just can use it now, if we're just going to snap our fingers and make that the case, I think it depends on when he uses it, right? Because the fire arrow is not a sure hit effect. He basically has created a pseudo sure hit effect in the way he creates that vacuum bomb. But if Gojo's curse technique is not burned out, the fire arrow will do nothing to him. But if Sukuna uses it when Gojo is on burnout, then that may be a way for him to win, right? We did see Gojo heal through Malevolent Shrine, so I think it's at least theoretically possible that if this was very early on in the fight, perhaps in that same moment where Gojo was healing through the Malevolent Shrine, he might have been able to heal through the fire arrow. Now, I won't say that he could for sure, because that is intense, right? But if anyone, Gojo might be able to. But if this happens later in the fight, he's definitely cooked if his infinity is on cooldown, on burnout, right? Because it's just too much for him to deal with at once. So depending on the when he uses it, it might have been a win condition, but I think it all just depends. And again, if infinity is on, it does nothing to him. Anyways, that's going to do it for this one, y'all. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.